Back home, the number one issue is this open southern border. As the police officers told me last week, we're not going to be able to arrest ourselves out of the problem. The peak in crime that we're seeing, the fentanyl poisoning, the human trafficking, they said you could double the number of police officers. We cannot arrest ourselves out of this problem. So to me, this is the defining issue of this election, both for the control of the Senate as well as who is going to be the president.
Howdy, everyone, and welcome back to Moment of Truth, the podcast of American Moment. My name is Saurabh Sharma. I'm the president of American Moment, and this week it is just me in discussion with one of the most fantastic guests we've had on the show yet. Today we had on Senator Dr. Roger Marshall from the great state of Kansas, a long time coming interview, a real patriot who's distinguished himself in office over these last few years in particular. But before I get to that, be sure as always to go to AmericanMoment.org. There you can find the 150 episode backlog of this podcast. You can find programs that we have upcoming. I think most relevant at this point is if you're coming to Washington, D.C. this summer and want to be part of our lecture series AM Fridays, where we'll have foundational public policy lectures on each of the important issues that matter on Capitol Hill every Friday. You can go to AmericanMoment.org/AM Fridays and sign up for that. If you're a staffer and you want your interns to learn something useful and not just another seminar on free markets, then send them to that. And we also have the application open for our fall fellowship for American Statecraft. First time ever that we've hosted that. I think applications close sometime in May or June. So please make sure to apply for that soon. It's our first time doing a fall class. We want it to be fantastic. This was the first year we did a spring class, and they're wildly successful. I think half of them have already gotten their full-time jobs, and we're still well over a month before the end of the program. So just really, really fantastic to be seeing our fellows constantly succeeding. You can also donate if you'd like to. AmericanMoment.org/donate. We always appreciate contributions that help keep the lights on around here and do more fantastic things. But today my guest was Dr. Roger Marshall, who's a physician, father, grandfather, and U.S. Senator for Kansas. He was a fifth-generation farm kid growing up in Butler County, and he was the first in his family to attend college. He graduated from Butler County Community College, got a bachelor's degree from Kansas State, and a medical doctorate from the University of Kansas. He's just a brilliant, brilliant man. He practiced medicine for 25 years, served in the Army Reserves for 7 years, delivered more than 5,000 babies, which turns out is a really great way to be popular in politics. Congressman Ron Paul also delivered like half of the babies in his congressional district. It's a great venue into politics. I think you get to know a lot of great families. And, he's been incredibly involved with his church, many local businesses and boards over the course of his life. And he decided to step into public service in 2015, ran for Congress and then eventually for Senate, and has really distinguished himself, I think, over the last few years. One of the first topics we talk about in the show is talking about this like new culture of real entrepreneurial activity that's come up in the United States Senate, where you have this cadre of a couple of members. You think of J.D. Vance, Josh Hawley, Rand Paul, Mike Lee, Senator Marshall, Ted Cruz, Mike Braun, a couple others that are just putting lead on target every single day. Senator Ron Johnson, former guest on this show, and they seem to be having fun. They're aggressive. They've completely swept aside that old, decrepit leadership structure. And I'm really excited to see what they do in the Senate. We talk about a lot of different topics on our show, namely what's super newsy this week is the incoming impeachment of Roger Mayorkas, what the strategy of conservatives in the Senate is going to be on that. We talk about Senator Marshall's bill on credit cards. He's got the banks spending God knows how much money to try to say that he's, some totalitarian communist for simply saying that the United States should not pay, 7 times the swipe fees that other countries do. We talk about Ukraine. We talk about, his concerns about health. We get into some of the kind of dissident right health stuff, how he's thinking about health and nutrition, how he's not necessarily believing in, us being a pill popping culture, that maybe people should focus on health and exercise above all. Just a really fantastic, broad episode. I always like to say we really don't have a lot of politicians on this show because most politicians can't really stand up to an hour plus of scrutiny. But But he really conducted himself fantastically. I feel like I could have talked with him for another hour or so. So we really hope you enjoy it. If you're a staffer and you believe your boss has what it takes to perform like Senator Marshall did, feel free to reach out. I promise you the answer is not always going to be yes, but we're always happy to hear pitches for that. We'll go now to Senator Roger Marshall.
Hey, this is Jared, producer of Moment of Truth. Quick disclaimer, this episode was recorded on April 11th, just before the Mayorkas impeachment vote. We hope you enjoy the episode.
Senator Marshall, thank you for coming on the show.
I'm excited to be here. I think we've got some great subjects to talk about.
Well, like I tell people very openly, we don't have a lot of elected officials on the show because very few of them can stand up to scrutiny at length, but you've really made a name for yourself doing some fantastic things in the Senate over the last few years. It's really been a joy to watch. I would love to just get a little bit of sense of where you're coming from. Tell us your story. Why'd you first run for elected office? You have a pretty interesting background that I think our guests would like to hear.
Well, Saurabh, thank you for having me. So I'm a fifth generation farm kid from rural Kansas. My dad became a police officer. We moved off the family farm when I was young, but we continued to work on those family farms. My American dream was to become a physician. And though there were people who said, oh, you can't do that because no one from your family's ever went to college. So how in the world do you think you can get all the way through med school? And I would sit there and say, well, it's because I work hard. And by the way, my grades are really, really, really good. And I love math. I love chemistry. I was the kid that would read the encyclopedia for fun. I read the newspapers just because I thought that's what you were supposed to do. I mean, since I was little. So I got to live out that dream thanks to loving parents, great teachers, just a supporting family. Went to rural Kansas. In the middle of about 60, 70,000 people, I was the only OBGYN there.
Wow.
I took lasers there, laparoscopes, infertility treatments as well, and delivered a baby a day on average for over 25 years. Took a group of doctors and we built our own hospital. Was part of a community bank, still remained in agriculture. I have a little entrepreneurial flair, a little bit of investment in oil and gas industry. When you're a doctor in a small town, you get all these opportunities brought to you. So I've signed the front side of a paycheck every other week for over 25 years. I think that gives me an interesting perspective, starting off with 3 employees, ending up with 300.
Wow.
So there you have it in a nutshell.
That's interesting that, when you're the doctor in a small town, people come to you for these opportunities because, and this is unfortunately changing, but the doctor being the most trusted figure in town or one of the most trusted figures in town, people obviously want to say, my business is legitimate. The local doctor is an investor and a partner in it. That makes a lot of sense. And then what drew you to politics originally? What was that first moment where you said, I might need to get engaged civically beyond obviously all the fantastic things you were doing for your small town?
Right. So certainly we were very involved in our community, and we were the person, if you were running for governor or for Senate, we would do the fundraiser at our house. So that was our extent of our involvement in politics, was doing fundraising. And at one point in time, some folks came to me and said, we would like for you to run for the House of Representatives. And my wife said, heck no. And as a matter of fact, she said, I want you to promise me you're not going to start any new businesses. You're not going to be on volunteer for any more boards. And you need to stay home here a little bit more and help raise these children of yours. So at this point, we had 2 in college and actually 1 had finished college, 2 in high school. And another year passed. This is the year 2015. And we have our first grandchild. And that was the defining moment. We had one of those conversations like, what's our legacy? What are we leaving for our grandchildren? And it was the worst economy of my professional lifetime. This is 2015 for a lot of reasons. And frankly, it was Barack Obama's policies that I think were driving the economy down. And there was so much regulations just exploding. The ACA, I'd implemented the ACA. I'd been in charge of overseeing our bank and the Dodd-Frank Act. So anyway, the economy is horrible. And our grandson is born with $35,000 of debt. And she looks at me and she says, this country's really broken. You like to fix things. It's now time for you to go. So we returned a couple phone calls of people that had recruited. And, those 2 phone calls turned into 4, those turned into 16. And really God was, blessing that. And I said, look, if we can raise $100,000 in the first month, then I think that we should keep going. And sure enough, we did. And the rest is history. I was in the House for 4 years. And then our senior senator announces his retirement, Senator Pat Roberts, who'd been up here for 40 years, an incredible man. And we ran for that. And here we are. I certainly feel like this is what God's plan is for our lives. When we went to rural America, we could have went anywhere in the country, but that was our mission field. We've done mission work all over the world, but we wanted to raise our kids in small town America, bring those things I talked about, the infertility. And now this is our mission. I think this is what God has called us to do. And my wife typically is the burning bush. She's the one that gets the messages from God, but I feel like this is our mission to try to leave this country better for the next generation.
Getting involved in 2015 is interesting because you basically came on the scene in that new way, right in the middle of everything about the Republican Party changing, or, going back to its roots, I would argue. What's it been like to get engaged in politics during the Trump era, essentially? How has that framed how you think about the issues, what kind of elected official you've chosen to be, what you've chosen to prioritize?
Right. So the big picture is the first 2 years were extraordinarily fun. We have the control of the House, the Senate, and the White House, and we were making changes. We were working with the White House. We were getting things done like expanding healthcare associations and transparency for hospitals, all sorts of neat things that I came here to help fix. Well, then that came to a screeching halt in 2018, and that's really still where we are. It couldn't be more frustrating right now. I'm the person that's looking 10 years ahead, and so if I'm very proactive, so instead we've been in this defensive posture. And now to back up a little bit more into the political side of it. When I was running for Congress, people would ask me those questions. Well, what are your politics? And I would say, well, I'm an American. I'm a Kansan. I'm a father. I teach Sunday school. I coach sports. And sure, I identify with conservative principles, especially the values part of this. I believe in the sanctity of life. I've delivered 5,000 babies. I believe life begins at conception. I believe in balancing our checkbook every month. I don't like debt. I'm out of personally have no debt in my life. So I'll bring those same financial wisdom, this business background, and figure out where we're going. And it's interesting that I'm going to back up here and say, who are your favorite presidents? And when I identified with favorite presidents, it wasn't based on, I didn't know when you're 8 or 12 years old, you don't know if they're Republican, they're Democrat, what their policies are. And I sat there and say, well, I identify with, of course, President Eisenhower from Kansas, Teddy Roosevelt.
We've got him right here.
there's Teddy, and I kind of like Thomas Jefferson. I loved his science mind, different things like that. And then here I am in the Senate now, and I've developed this, what I would call populist brand, probably maybe one of the most conservative folks up here, what you would think as traditionally conservative, but I have this populist streak in me, and even maybe a little bit of a libertarian streak that really folks back home would be very happy just to be left alone by the federal government. So bringing all those tools together, as you said, this new, maybe going back to our roots, Republican Party of less government, protect our constitutional rights, and just just government leave us the heck alone.
Absolutely. So, the last few years in the Senate, I think that there's really been a second wind that a lot of the conservative senators have caught, really coming into their own as a block. I think I can think about 5 to 10 of you that it seems like are always ganging up to do something cool or interesting to either gum up the works or get something good passed or something bad killed. Tell me a little bit about just what that has been like. Is that an accurate assessment? Do you feel like you guys are working together better than you have before? What's that been like to be part of the generational changing of the guard in the Senate?
It feels really good.
Yeah.
If folks can go back and look at our press conference we did earlier this week, standing beside Marsha Blackburn, Ted Cruz, Mike Lee, John Kennedy, Ron John, Mike, I think I said Mike Lee, and more. But this group of folks that my friends back home call us the Patriots, that we are the modern day Patriots. And there's probably about 18 of us that work on something we call the steering committee. Mike Lee has been the chairman of that committee for quite some time, really trying to focus on the true Constitution and bringing in conservative principles. But still, I think what's moved the wind right now is just the critical mass. That if you look at the last group of, 8 or 12 senators elected, all of us kind of have this populist streak. I don't think it's the driving factor. I still would be more interested in balancing the budget than anything else. I think that would be the biggest impact on my grandchildren's generation. But it is really interesting. I think we've reached a critical mass, and we could see 4 or 5 or 6 more of this populist brand senators come next year. And that's going to influence, who we elect the leader to be of the Senate as well. But I think that this is what we're hearing from folks back home, is the Republican Party is becoming the party of folks that carry their lunch pail to work and of small businesses, as opposed to being ruled by big banks and big corporations.
I certainly hope so. And I want to talk more about what you're hoping to see in terms of the leadership of the Senate a little bit later. But I think it's important to frame it in the context of some of these big failures that have happened over these last few years, namely the border deal being, I think, the biggest manifestation of this old way of doing things in Washington. Luckily, it seems to have fallen apart. But just give us your narrative on what it was like to be a senator that wasn't brought into that insider process, and what it was like to team up with the other conservative senators to say, no, this is not enough.
I always talk about priorities up here. Everyone brings me all these good ideas, and most of the ideas are we need to spend more money in their particular program, and then they want me to balance the budget, but not on their back as well. So it's about priorities. Mm-hmm. And let's just be really clear here. My leadership on the Senate side, their priority is to fund Ukraine. So they were going to use this border deal no one's talking about this. They use this border deal as a lever to get their Ukraine funding. Interesting, Joe Biden just recently, when he was talking to the Japanese prime minister, the first thing he mentions is Ukraine. The ugly American, saying, we know you got all these problems in Indochina. And I had just met with the prime minister from Japan a couple of days before, one-on-one. And here's the ugly American. You got your own problems with China, but we want to make sure that you're supporting Ukraine. So anyway, they're using the border as a lever.
Half a world away.
Half a world away, and but driving their own political agenda. And our leadership was in bed with that. We could talk about that more, but specifically, that was their lever. And there's a group of us that would say, look, I really stand beside Israel. It's real important to me spiritually, personally, and politically to support Israel at this point in time. A friend in need is a friend indeed, and they're in need right now. So let's support Israel. Let's not abandon them in their moment of need. And by the way, they're on the right side of this, and Hamas is on the wrong side. They're still chanting death to America. But you're right. They what they brought forth to us for the border deal would have made it worse. I was hopeful. I tried to remain supportive, though they weren't going to tell us anything. It was totally done in the dark. And I think we had one person negotiating for us. And this is a complex topic. I've done several business deals. I would never go into a business deal with the Secretary of DHS, who's doing a horrible job. So he's in there making the deal along with 15 of Biden's people and 3 or 4 Democrats. And we have one Republican at the table. I want to go in there with my guns loaded. I want Ted Cruz just to beat the hell out of them every time they say something stupid. I want Mike Lee beside me, working on the technical legal part of this, saying, wait a second, that's not what this deal is showing here, and bring all those minds together. So we wasted these incredible minds that we have. We've got the best legal experience up here. I don't know, a handful of them have clerked at the Supreme Court, all great lawyers in their own. I'm a doctor. I'm going to get the consultation. So we didn't put our best foot forward. It was set up for failure to begin with, and I blame that on our leadership.
Yeah. What was that moment that you guys realized you would need to oppose the bill, and what was the reaction from Senate leadership?
Wow. So I recall a Saturday afternoon. I'm pretty sure it was a Saturday. And why we were here, I don't remember why. And they finally kind of presented the deal to us, what it looked like. And I think, including myself, we just lost it. We get together every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at lunch. About 40 of the 50 members of the Senate show up. We have lunch together. And these are where the heated discussions happen. Just like if you ever had a family discussion, family business, or what to do with the farm, this was one of those discussions. We lost it, and you could just see the room temperature change, where our leadership felt like that they were out on a plank and going the wrong direction, and basically leadership walked out and did a little gaggle with the press and said, "We're pulling the plug on this thing. We don't support it." It was certainly, it may be the defining moment of when this tide changed, where our caucus changed to say, wait a second, there's a new sheriff in town. And not that I'm that sheriff, but we collectively are driving a lot more of the policy right now, I think. We failed a couple of times. We're winning more than we're losing now, though.
That's really interesting. One of the spins that DC media loves to put on every time conservatives are trying to exercise power in this Congress especially is that you guys have one half of one branch of government. What are you doing? You don't actually have the ability to dictate policy. You have to compromise. What say you and the other conservatives? Why is that a misrepresentation of what you guys are asking for, or how these negotiations should be going?
Right. So again, it takes 60 votes on the Senate to do most anything. 60. And as long as our caucus sticks together, all 49 of us, we can pretty much freeze the Senate Democrats out of anything. It takes 60, not 50 plus 1. So they have to get some of us to flip. And, on the House side, they had this, they try not to do anything unless they have the majority of the majority. But our leadership continues to walk into these buzzsaws without the majority of the Republicans. And the spending bills are great examples of this, is that those spending bills do not represent the majority of the majority. And we begged our caucus, Republican caucus, to stay strong. Don't give them one vote until we, in my case, wanted to balance the budget and fund Israel. 4 times I've taken standalone funding for Israel to the floor, and each time the Democrats shoot it down. So we have that power in the Senate, much more than an individual person does on the House side. And the other piece, and this is really inside baseball, the Senate runs on what's called unanimous consent. Mm-hmm. So most of our legislation gets through with you go down, whether you're Republican or senator, and offer a piece of legislation, and as long as no one objects to that, then it's going to move forward. So we can freeze that. And that's exactly what we're at this point with this impeachment trial, is if they don't give us an impeachment trial, we can grind this place to a stop. Any one of us can. I'll give Rand Paul his credit right now. He's probably the best at doing this. Yeah. They've been willing to spend the time and object to all this pork that tries to go through on unanimous consent. So it takes 60 senators to vote on anything, to move it forward. And as long as our caucus sticks together, we can stop most anything.
Mm-hmm. Luckily, our audience is a little bit wise to this stuff, mostly because Rachel Bovard comes on frequently to explain it to them. So there's an impeachment trial for Alejandro Mayorkas, Biden's DHS secretary. There's an impeachment resolution that's going to come over from the House. Lay out the fight for us. What's about to happen? What should we be watching out for? And what are the conservatives in the Senate going to be demanding in this process?
Right. So we expect the House to bring over these articles of impeachment. And when they do, Chuck Schumer's going to table it. He's not going to allow an impeachment trial. This issue is so toxic to the Democrats. They're willing just to sweep it under the rugs, change precedent in the history of the United States forever.
So explain that. So every time there have been articles of impeachment brought to the Senate, they have historically gotten a full trial.
Exactly. So there's actually been 21 impeachments total on the House side that have been successful. 4 of those, the person died, they resigned, whatever the case was. But the other 17 were all prosecuted. They all had an impeachment trial. So what's supposed to happen is we're supposed to be sworn in as jurors and judge, really, in this case, the senators are, and have a trial. I think people probably recall what happened with President Trump, that there were 2 impeachment trials. The Republicans controlled the Senate with the first one. They could have tabled it.
Right.
but that would be what we would call a nuclear option. We think if Schumer tables this, I would consider that a nuclear option, and any type of nuclear retaliation, as far as I'm concerned, is on the table. And I would take us back to 2013 when Harry Reid was the Democrat Senate Majority Leader, and he changed the bar for how many votes it would take to become a judge. He lowered it from 60 down to the 50. And at that point in time, it changed history. It changed precedent. We called that the nuclear option. Sure enough, when Gorsuch, 2017, I believe, when Gorsuch is the Supreme Court nominee, it come back to bite him in the butt. Yeah. Because we only had the 50 rather than the 60 votes. We would have never got to 60 on Neil Gorsuch or the rest of them. So we think that this is as big a nuclear bomb as what Harry Reid did back in 2013.
So, practically speaking, if Chuck Schumer decides that he wants to table it, could he have defections from his own caucus that prevent him from being able to do it? Can the Republicans do anything to actually stop that if he tries to do it? Or is it purely in terms of, how they can retaliate after?
Right. So bingo. Point one is if he makes a motion to table, it's non-debatable. Mm-hmm. We have to have a vote right away. Mm-hmm. And basically he could squelch the whole party. But it would just take 2 Democrats to flip this. If 2 Democrats would vote against tabling it, then it would force the impeachment trial, assuming we get all the Republicans. Yeah. And that's a big assumption. I understand. But we're having those discussions. I'm more hopeful today than I was yesterday as far as getting all the Republicans to stick together on this. Look, I respect if you would say, you go through the trial and you say he's innocent. That's not my thoughts, but at least give us a trial. Mm-hmm. Give the Americans their day in the court. Look, back home, the number one issue is this open southern border. As the police officers told me last week, we're not going to be able to wrest ourselves out of the problem. The peak in crime that we're seeing, the fentanyl poisoning, the human trafficking, they said you could double the number of police officers. We cannot arrest ourselves out of this problem. So to me, this is the defining issue of this election, both for the control of the Senate as well as who is going to be the president. And that's why we're trying to put pressure on the senators who are up for re-election. The Senator John Tester from Montana, that's a purple state.
He just wants to run on the fact that he lost his fingers in a harvester. That's his entire argument as far as I can tell. I've signed up for his email fundraising list, and that sees to be the entire argument. Look at me, I lost some fingers, and it's like that's not an argument. You're not representing the people. Of Montana
a classical case of a person who says I'm a moderate, but he votes like a liberal. So his voting record to be, I bet, 99% consistent with Joe Biden's request as well. So the whole issue now, the only way we can stop this, the only way we can force a trial is if we flip 2 Democrat senators. And that's what our big objective is to do. And public opinion matters. And you think about every impeachment trial, even going back to Watergate, the threat of the impeachment that forced President Nixon to resign in 1974, public opinion can really drive this. But you turn on, I work out every afternoon, and whoever gets there first, a Democrat or Republican, gets to choose the volume on the TV. Now, we'll have 2 TVs, one with Fox News or Fox Business, and one typically with the CNN. And during my entire 45-minute workabout, all they talked about was Trump. Trump this, Trump that, Trumpitis. They have this Trump derangement syndrome. So they're going to run on the we hate Trump deal. Yeah. But I think this is what we want to make the issue, is the American people demand someone to be held accountable. And how does Congress hold somebody accountable? How many times has someone told me or told you from your organization, how do we hold these people accountable? I'm pounding the table here, but that's it. This is one of the ways we can hold people accountable, but they don't want this on the front page. They don't want this to be the story of the day. It'll be hard even for CNN to ignore an impeachment trial.
So one of the snide, snickering things that the media has started to say every time someone like yourself or someone in Montana or someone in Ohio brings up the border issue is, why do you care? You're not a border state. You're not Texas. You're not New Mexico. Yeah. I think it'd be valuable to get your perspective, what you're hearing from your state in terms of what the consequences of this open border actually are for everyday Kansans, because I think what's changed over the last couple decades is every state's a border state now.
Yeah, bingo. Almost 3 years ago now, a mom came to me and told me the story of her son, Cooper Davis. Cooper and some friends, he's a great student, a great kid, and he and 3 other friends ordered 2 Percocet tablets from a smart app on their phone. Cooper took 1/2 of 1 tablet and died. The other 3 kids ended up in the emergency room, but they survived. And ever since then, I've been on this battle to stop the fentanyl poisoning. In a small state like Kansas, population 3 million people, very rural, we lose a young adult to fentanyl poisoning every day. We're using Narcan 10 or 20 times a day. The firemen, the ambulance, the police officers in the school, I've been fighting to get Narcan everywhere because it can literally save someone's lives. And now this crime is just exploding along with it. I mentioned, I think my dad was the chief of police. My dad taught me, toddler, not a toddler, but in grade school, that wherever there's drugs, that crime is going to be right there with it. So as the cartel has a huge presence in the state of Kansas now. Not only are they going up and down our highways because we're this distribution center, but they literally are having anchor positions across the state as well. And now the Chinese Triad, the Chinese Mafia, is in the middle of this as well. The Chinese Mafia launders the money in Bitcoin, by the way. And then also the Chinese Triad's in charge of the human trafficking. So we're now seeing massage parlors spring up all across the state of Kansas. And you can imagine what type of massage that they're getting. So the human trafficking, the fentanyl poisoning is just exploding across the state of Kansas. And again, crime is up. Violent crimes are up. It'll take 5 or 10 years. Even if we secured the border tomorrow, it'll take 5 or 10 years to get rid of these criminals.
Yeah, the fentanyl issue is one of the most underrated ones, I think, because it's just become sort of atmospheric. People say, "Oh, this is normal," but you look at any chart of drug overdose deaths over the past couple of decades. I mean, it's hockey sticked up in the last 10 years. And that's hundreds of thousands of lives that are just indelibly affected by it. Drugs is an interesting issue because there's a series of issues that I think that you can uniquely speak to as a physician. Just take drugs, for instance, that there's definitely a move today in the modern Republican Party to say that we should start softening our approach to drugs. We should consider legalizing recreational drugs. You mentioned that, when drugs come into a community, that crime almost always follows. How are you thinking about that debate inside the Republican Party and in the whole country these days?
I can't do it. Yeah. I just can't do it. Explanation point in the fentanyl poisoning, 250,000 people, young Americans, have died from fentanyl poisoning. That's 3 times the number of soldiers we lost in Vietnam. So how does Joe Biden sleep? The marijuana thing, look, Oklahoma and Colorado have legalized it. Those are states beside us. They thought, they'll make some money on the taxes of it. I guarantee you they're spending more money on the social ramifications of this. But what's happening in both of those places now is this Chinese Triad is coming in, and the front is legal marijuana growth. But they're growing 10 times more than that to satisfy the illegal marijuana trade out there. I'm absolutely convinced it's a gateway drug, that it affects I think it causes depression long-term. There may be some medical uses for it. I'm not sold on it. I'm willing to look at any studies. I'm willing for the DEA to consider medical marijuana. You don't want Congress deciding everything, but so I'm willing to talk about the medical marijuana part of it, but just grossly legalizing it. I just guarantee you, it's been a horrible experiment. I don't think you could find a a person in leadership in either of those states that said, oh, it's worked out just fine. But here's the problem. Kansas is right there in the middle of it. So again, not only are they smuggling fentanyl up and down the highways of Kansas, this marijuana trade is right there with it. And it's usually side by side. The same person that's printing fentanyl tablets and selling them is the same people that are carrying the marijuana up. And it's interesting to me that the Chinese Triad is more involved in the marijuana trade. So these people are very sophisticated. These criminals are. They've got their own lawyers, their own MBA accountants, although they're very, very sophisticated. And again, don't miscount the money laundering. This will be a story. You wait and see. People aren't, just like I was talking about fentanyl 3 years ago, now I'm talking about the Chinese Triad and the marijuana. Your listeners will follow this story. It's going to explode here in the next year.
Yeah, that spillover is such an interesting point, right? I mean, you look at a map of the United States, you see the lines demarcating the states. But if there's a dispensary on one side of the Oklahoma-Kansas border, people can drive 15 minutes. This is not exactly a hard border between these two states. So it naturally spills over into your state. What do you hear from, because one of the arguments that certain kind of Republican that says that we should be legalizing marijuana will say is, oh, it's popular, you have to win elections, that kind of thing. What have you been hearing from everyday Kansans as they grapple with this issue?
Yeah, so we've done multiple roundtables on different issues, but certainly a big focus of mine is to support our sheriff and our highway patrol and our police officers. They're all near and dear to my heart, and they need some love right now because you have the White House who has just turned their back to them. I'll be nice and say it that way. And they're begging me not to legalize marijuana. They're just begging me. They're saying, look, this is the gateway problem. These kids all end up in a bad situation. I'm the doctor. I got to weigh the benefits and the risk. You describe a potential benefit. I don't see that much of it. And just the risk, the downside is just too down. And I did try to take 2 years to sort this out. I'm a very cautious person, above all, do no harm. But I just can't see. I'm even though 2 years ago I was saying, well, I'll consider it, but I'm done. This is a slam dunk. As a grandfather, as a father, you don't want this stuff in your schools. And there's other things that are just as bad. I'm just as concerned. I think social media may even be worse than marijuana. I acknowledge that, but two wrongs don't make a right. That was another one of my dad's saying. Two wrongs don't make a right. I think that don't underestimate what the Chinese are doing and the Russians with propaganda that are inducing our kids to do some horrible things, including experimenting with drugs and the marijuana. They're very sophisticated at this. Don't underestimate the brainwashing and the propaganda coming from social media attacking our kids.
Yeah, tell me, talking about social media as an addiction, as a public health issue is a relatively new way of talking about it. I know that states like Utah that are always on the cutting edge of thinking creatively about this have been talking about it that way for a while. How are you thinking about what the downsides of social media are? There's these different buckets of concern that people have. Some people have concerns about competition. Some people have concerns about national security. But I'd love to hear your perspective from the health issue of what social media is doing to the country.
So certainly I'm in this process of sorting it out. What's the right guardrails? I've been begging these social media companies for 2 years. You guys better police yourself. You know exactly what you're doing. You're using machine learning. They call it, artificial intelligence, machine learning, to send the algorithms to cause bad things, to induce you to look at more and more of this propaganda as well. So I've been begging them to fix the problem, begging them to install some type of their own parental permission. And I don't know how to tell them to make that work. But they do. They know how to do it. The people closest to the problem, just like you could have a theater and say this is an X-rated movie. If the person at the front desk just turns their head and say, you look like you're 21. There's tobacco behind the counter here. Oh, you look like you're 16. Yeah, no, you got to check the IDs, right? So there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. So I'm begging them to fix it. If they don't, then Congress is going to have to step in. I'm going to jump to the TikTok. At this point in time, as your United States Senator, I've taken a deep dive, and I'm telling you it's a national security issue. And at this point, I don't see the benefits outweigh the risk of it. And until I'm happy with them selling it, I'm not sure that'll even fix it. I'm still afraid that somehow China would still hang on to this technology that's inside of TikTok. I don't trust them.
It's like you'd have to audit the entire code base, and I don't think Microsoft or Oracle is going to do that.
See, that's just it. So I don't quite understand the technology part of it, but all I know is when it comes to propaganda and stealing intellectual property and cyber attacks, is that China and Russia have people, thousands of people. This is what they wake up and do every day. And what is it? This big number for every one FBI officer trying to stop it. China's got 5,000 people trying to attack us. I've said in the top secret rooms of these big companies, the financial companies, and just watch the attacks coming. It's not 1 per second; it's 5 or 10 per second, and they're all coming from China, North Korea, and Russia. So I'm way more concerned about this issue than I am how many ships China has in the South Sea.
It's a smart point, and it's one that we're not really set up to respond to. We have a highly developed military, very technologically advanced, but you compare our cyber capabilities to any of these other countries, it's night and day difference. Their most talented coders and hackers end up working for their state cyber commands, whereas in our country they go work in the private sector, which is great, but it means that we're highly vulnerable. It's interesting. It feels like healthcare policy is the thing that no one in Washington wants to talk about, because it seems like every time anyone tries to do anything, it blows up in their face. But there's a chance that we might have unified Republican control of Congress and the White House in the coming years. And I'm sure people are going to start hitting you up and saying, Dr. Marshall, what say you? What do you think some of the priorities going into these next few years? And be specific. Obviously we need to deregulate, we need to bring down costs, but what should specifically the goals of that next theoretical package of Republican policy changes be? Yeah.
So certainly that's one of the reasons I came to Congress, was to fix healthcare, more specifically the cost of healthcare. Mm-hmm. This Affordable Care Act, what a misnomer. So the government is supplementing each ACA policy on the average of $20,000 per year now. It's $20,000 per year. And then the customer, the patient back home, they're paying $300 a month, and they're thinking it's, relatively free, but it's not. It's costing American taxpayers $20,000. And it is a bigger deal, this regulation part of it, though, that the way you drive the cost down of healthcare is anything that makes healthcare more transparent, that anything that drives innovation, anything that allows the patient to become consumers again. Right now, when a patient would come to me and we say, look, you need to have surgery, the first question is, does Medicare cover this? Mm-hmm. Does insurance cover it? Well, then it's fine. So somehow we need to make them consumers again. I'm going to back up from that, though, and say we need to work on nutrition. We really do. Food is medicine. If you want me to save Medicare, I need Americans to eat a little healthier and to walk a little bit more. I'm not saying you got to go to the gym. I'd be happy just walking 20 minutes a day, less processed foods, less sugar, less salt in their diet, would literally move the needle on the spend on healthcare. And then I'm going to jump to prescription drugs just for a second. Again, my solution is more competition. And that's why actually the 7th bill that Joe Biden signed was legislation we wrote that would help biosimilars and generics get to market sooner. And I kept hoping, and now we're starting to see it. There's good competitors out there for diabetes now, and you're going to have a lot more coming online as well that are going to increase competition and drive the prices of those types of drugs down. I think that I'm talking about pharmacy benefit managers just for a second. Look, I'm all for capitalism, but without competition, then it doesn't matter. So 3 of them are controlling 90% of the market. There are 3 of them in the top 12 of the Fortune 500. They're taking 50 cents of every dollar. And they're not bringing anything to the table as far as I'm concerned. But we got to be careful. So this is where Bernie Sanders and I argue, is his solution is just to say, this is what we're going to pay you. And my solution is more competition. Yeah. So whatever I can do to support more competition as well. So those are a couple thoughts. We could dive into healthcare really for the next couple hours. But off the top of my head, those would be a couple pieces of the puzzle. I would drive more of the healthcare back to the states. with high risk pools. Association health cares, use your HSAs I would be okay with HSA to pay for your premium even. Because I think that would drive more consumerism. So I got 100 ideas, but those are a couple of them.
The nutrition and exercise one is particularly interesting to me because I think in a funny way, as the Republican Party's political perspective on big business has changed over the last 15 years, that has actually had implications for its view on that issue. So, whereas maybe 15 years ago, if you said what you said, people would say, hands off my Frito-Lay. Now people are saying, well, maybe the biggest food companies in the world don't have my best interests at heart. And so I think that, and I've seen this firsthand, but I think our voters are much more primed to hear a different message on this than they would have been historically. And I know definitely, kind of on the leading edge of right-wing subcultures on the internet, people are open to all sorts of crazy ideas. They're talking about raw milk. They're talking about, eating eggs and carnivore diets and so on and so forth. Would just be really curious to have you dive a little bit more into that. I mean, it feels like there's so many barriers in front of Americans eating healthier. I mean, at a certain level, right? I mean, the tastiest food, the food engineered to be hyper palatable, is this highly processed food that's making us sick and fat. What should we do about that?
Yeah. This is something I've been working on for 30 years, working with patients. I probably had 8 or 10 OB patients at a time that were diabetic. So every week we'd have a diabetic clinic. And it was actually the only time that in people's lives I could get them to quit smoking or make diet changes is when they're pregnant. So, how do you take that moment in time and replicate it as well? So the things up here, the big picture level, FDA. What does the F stand for in FDA? Well, don't ask our vice president, but it stands for food, right? So how do we make that is as important as what's the new miracle drug to take care of my diabetes? So I think part of it is the emphasis up here. I'd rather push these companies that process food to working on this without me coming in with a hammer. What type of carrots are there out there? I hate to use food stamps as the food police, but I'm telling you, there's a lot more people in favor of that today than there were yesterday. From the standpoint, should food stamps go for a 64-ounce soda with extra caffeine and extra sugar in it? I'm starting to struggle with that purchase. I don't want to micromanage it, but boy, you would be shocked, I think, if people just gave up. I've seen people do this, just give up soda. And I hate to pick on anybody, but potato chips, because I like potato chips too. But just giving up, things like that would lose 10% of their body weight. And especially if you throw that along with just walking for 20 minutes. So I think it's going to be executing a simple plan well. This is not rocket science. So how do we execute this plan? I've tried to get the Surgeon General, to be more active. What type of warning would we put on a 32-ounce soda? Is that good? This is dangerous. I don't know. So I'm looking for solutions. I do think that this younger generation, though, is much more attuned to this. And they're hearing it. So we need to be preaching that message up here too, that you don't need I started 20 years ago, I said all of a sudden people want fast food medicine. Really, all of a sudden I get to see this shift in people saying they just want to call me and get a prescription to fix whatever their problem was. I feel depressed today. Can you just call me in an antidepressant for a couple weeks? Oh, I'm having problems studying in college right now. Can you get me one of those drugs that help you concentrate better? That type of mentality, drive-through medicine. So we need to go back to the basics.
Well, it's funny. You said fast food medicine. I thought you were going to be talking about what feels like the new hot trend, which is Ozempic and these GLP inhibitors. It seems like we're rapidly moving to a policy consensus where it's like, oh yeah, every obese second grader in America is going to be on Ozempic now. Putting aside the fact that a country that has a meaningful population of obese second graders has big problems, probably. Right. I know it's very new, but how are you thinking about what feels like the complete lack of controversy around just making this drug, according to Bernie Sanders, a human right paid for by the government to hundreds of millions of people?
I just remember so many times in history where the new drug came along and it 2 years later, 10 years later, it's like, oh my gosh, this drug causes something.
Yeah.
So I think it's got its place. And I think it's something to get people to the right spot. But if you don't make some changes internally, if you don't reset your nutrition clock a little bit, if you don't start doing some exercise, I hope people can get off of it. This younger age group, though, we've got to focus on nutrition programs. And here's the problem I want to make sure everyone understands, though. There's an affordability quotient to this as well. Look, I was fortunate to grow up on a farm where we had plenty of fresh fruits and vegetables and access to healthy meats as well. My grandparents had a dairy, so all the milk we could drink. But carbohydrates are cheap. Yeah. Fresh fruits and vegetables are more expensive. Anything
cheap and self-stable.
Yeah. So all those types of things. So one of the things I've tried to do up here on ag policy, 85% of a farm bill is actually food programs, is try to reward people rather than trying to be a food manager. The food police is to try to say, we're going to give you double the value. If you got a food stamp here that's worth $1, if you buy these particular fresh fruits and vegetables, then we're going to give you double the value and reward those because they are expensive. So reward the value for that. Try to teach people new habits. Try to emphasize working with our food banks. Look, 3-day-old donuts are really cheap, but instead trying to get healthy foods in there. Another thing we're trying to work on is access to primary care. So look, I would give to you that if you break your arm, if you have a heart attack, you go to ER, regardless of your ability to pay, they're going to take care of you. But not everybody has access to primary care, meaningful, affordable access to primary care. So something I'm working on with Bernie Sanders is to increase funding for these community health centers. And one of the things we would do is bring nutrition into that clinic. And I don't think you need a PhD in nutrition. The best coaches I've ever seen, whether it was nutrition or taking a new medicine, are nurses.
Yeah.
I love nurses. I think that they do it's an incredible profession. So get them involved in that nutrition coaching and even teaching people how to learn to cook. My wife volunteered every day, once a week at a food bank. And I remember seeing one time, came home, looking at the credit card bill, and she'd bought 3 crock pots. I said, dear, we've got 5 of them. And she said, well, we had some meat in here, a roast, and these young ladies didn't know how to cook a roast. Yeah. And it's like, so she went and bought 3 crock pots, brought them back and did a little, and it's a really, even I can cook a roast now, you know, You throw in the crock pot, throw in some carrots and potatoes, and you got a nice healthy meal 4 or 5 hours later.
Yeah. That's fascinating.
All these personal experiences. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because the primary care thing goes to some of the issues that are emergent in the medical profession. I know that, the most salient issue that people talk about is the absence of doctors in rural areas. Yeah. It seems to me that the chain of causality here is that medical school has gotten more and more expensive. It's also become more and more of sort of a status profession. And so people are attracted to super specialties in big cities. There's not a lot of primary care physicians going out to rural Kansas, going out to the communities that just need a basic country doctor. How do we fix that?
Yeah, exactly. So this is certainly an issue that I've dealt with for 30 years. This has been a problem in Kansas since before I went to medical school, is getting doctors to go to rural America. And there's not one simple solution. They're just part of this big move from rural America to urban America. The big issue back in the small town is the call schedule. I was on call every day or every other day for 25 years. Yeah. My wife and I did not sleep through the night for 25 years without at least a phone call. At least every other night, leaving bed to go out and do work.
Especially as an OBGYN, people going to labor whenever.
You got it. Yeah. And the emergency room coverage. So, I think that they're trying to figure out ways to bring in doctors to give that one doctor or 2 doctors in a town relief. That's one of the solutions out there. Repayment of scholarships if you go to rural America. That's, again, something Senator Sanders and I have tried to. And Dr. Cassidy is my ranking member. Bill Cassidy, Senator. He's also, working on these projects as well. Those are some small things that are happening. I think telemedicine is part of the solution. There's going to be more nurse practitioners and PAs out doing more and more things in rural America. But setting up these community health centers, there's now 33 of those across the state of Kansas, and half of them are in rural America. and trying to bring residents. So as you go through a residency program, this is what happens. You're from, I grew up in a little city called El Dorado, Kansas. You go off to medical school. You meet the girl of your dreams or the guy of your dreams. If you're a woman going to medical school, and they're from the big city, they're not going to go back home. Yeah. So we're trying to get more residencies and in primary care in a little bit more of a smaller city. Where maybe they'll meet each other and say, hey, this is where we want to raise our kids. And that would be my wife's and my story. We did residency, of course, in Kansas City and Wichita. We went off to Tampa, St. Pete for residency. We had 2 kids by then. And we said, oh, God, my daughter's in kindergarten. We didn't like the experience there. Let's go back home. It's time to go home and raise our kids where we know how to raise them.
Yeah. One of the other things that is definitely emergent and concerning, there started to be reporting on this, is the influence of DEI and a lot of these left-wing ideologies on the medical profession. I think it's, going back to your origin story, right? I mean, the doctor being the most trusted figure in town, someone that people rely on. Having this profession corrupted by left-wing ideology seems like the worst possible thing that we could do. How are you thinking about that and some of the challenges that are about to come on the horizon?
I'm just shaking my head. The last thing I thought, if a person comes to see me as a doctor, certainly if they had certain groups have higher risk of hypertension, of preeclampsia, absolutely. That would be, but that's just my scientific part of me, but it had nothing to do with me judging them. So, and I understood the culture of most all the populations in my community. Yeah. I think that's what's important. Do you understand the cultural differences? And that's really hard to teach in school. Yeah. I think you learn that at recess and playing sports and being part of a band or whatever it is. That's when you learn these cultural differences. On my track team, my goodness, I learned lots about cultural differences on my track team. Americans know how to figure this part of it out. Let's stay focused on turning out good doctors, the best doctors that we can. I kind of jumping ahead here, but I've always said if we get our schools right, we're going to be fine. And right now we're not getting our schools right. Again, we don't need a complicated plan. We need a simple plan executed very well. Let's go back and emphasize reading, writing, arithmetic, coding, some tech skills as well. I'm a big fan of technical colleges, community colleges. I think that that's probably part of this solution as well out there. This DEI is blown up in their face, and it's going to, 40 years now, the history books are not going to be kind with the result of this.
I know people already talk, in a very particular way. They say, I'm not going to a doctor that graduated in the last 5 or 10 years because people just like, stick to the older doctor that, came through a system that I can trust a little bit more. And that's because that's a declining population of doctors and the younger ones are a rising population. Yeah. So at some point.
We spent, I worked 100 hours a week through med school and residency and 36-hour shifts were not uncommon. And despite that, there was no time left for me to learn other things. Yeah. I needed to learn anatomy, physiology, how to do a C-section. And I just think we're good people. In general, good people. We're going to do the right thing. We're going to do our best to take care of every person. They're a solution in search of a problem.
Yeah. As a final question, Senator, you've in all the topics we've discussed, whether it's Ukraine, immigration, fentanyl, health, you've exhibited, I think, real interesting heterodoxy vis-a-vis what might be the kind of mainstream big business corporate Republican position. But there's one piece of legislation in particular that I think really demonstrates that, and that's what you've been doing on the credit cards. What's the problem with the credit cards? I feel like I read in some libertarian rag somewhere that you're trying to take away my points. Why are you trying to take away my points? What's going on here, and why have you made DC so angry?
Right. And more importantly, I made 4 big banks in New York angry and 2 credit card companies. Look, Americans are paying 7 times more every time they use their credit card. It's called a swipe fee. 7 times more than what the European Union is, 5 times more than the Chinese. Even American credit cards in China Americans are spending 5 times more and 3 times more than what our Canadian friends do up north as well. So once again, we have a duopoly. 2 companies control 85% of the business. This, by the way, regulations. Regulations is what drives consolidation of the industry. So there's no competition happening right there. So when Dick Durbin, a hardcore Democrat, came to me with this, how could we fix this? He wanted to set a fee on it. And I said, no, let's have increased competition. So when the bank issues a credit card, they can choose Visa or MasterCard to be the network they would run that on. But the bank has to choose a second option. And that's going to help drive the price down. In my opinion, it's going to drive the price down. The folks back home, Main Street, convenience stores, grocery stores, mom and pop stores, they're spending more on swipe fees than they do on their utility bill. More they do on healthcare for their employees, more than on their rent. This is the number 2 thing after the cost of labor that's an expense for them. They live in a very competitive industry. You notice the price of gasoline is usually within about 2 cents of each other. They operate at cost plus about 0.5%.
Wow.
So I think that this is a situation where I'm going to be fighting for Main Street over Wall Street. You're right. The big banks, credit card companies have spent, I think, over $200 million attacking us on this.
Wow.
So I think I'm over the target, right? Yeah. We're over the target. And I mentioned, by the way, we're spending 28% on interest now on a credit card. 28%. Yeah. I would think that that's highway robbery. Yeah. And unfortunately, in this Biden world of Bidenflation, our credit cards are maxed, the highest credit card debt in American history. Late fees are exorbitant, I think, as well. So we've let a couple giants run amok here.
Yeah. That's interesting that you would describe high credit card debt as a problem, because I think that's a very Christian idea, right? That, you don't want usurious debt inflicting itself on everyday Americans. Very specifically, what's it like to be on the receiving end of pressure from these very moneyed lobbies? Like, what does that actually look like? Are they running ads in your state? Are they sending lobbyists to harass you? What's it actually like?
Yes, all the above. And by the way, huge fan of Dave Ramsey.
Yeah.
And it's a course that our church teaches a couple times a year, very much into tune that neither a borrow nor lender be type of attitude. And if you can stay away from credit cards, that's how you're able to afford a home. Almost impossible in Joe Biden's world. But I'm used to it. One thing I've always been able to do my whole life is to stay focused on doing the right thing. That I was raised on these values of faith and family, community, education, and hard work. I sleep fine at night. I do the right thing. And I just know, I realize I'm over the target, that this is hundreds of billions of dollars of profit for these big banks and the credit card. And I get it. So they're going to come after me. I think at the end of the day, people won't lose their points. I think it's a very competitive market out there to get those points. Those banks just want you using their credit card, because then that's the key to your financial kingdom. They're going to do anything they can to hook you. And then they're going to try to make a house loan, or probably some type of a house improvement loan. Or how about you just need $25,000 personal loan? Just to get, so they just want to put their hooks in you, right? So those points, and then a lot of the points, of course, like I'm a big Cabela's guy. I love my Cabela's points, but that will definitely not be changed. Lastly, I'll say this: the other thing I did with Dick Durbin is I said, look, I don't want any bank with less than $100 billion of assets to be impacted by this. So there's only 32 institutions in the country that have assets of over $100 billion. So there's not a bank in Kansas that will be impacted by this. Wow. Again, I'm protecting my small banks. I'm protecting small mom and pop organizations. So always looking for that sweet spot. Where can I introduce competition as opposed to government control over this? I think it'll work. The pressure's pretty huge up here. Back home, attack ads. And then I'm amazed here in DC how many ads are run trying to influence staffers and people like that.
If you're listening to this, you're almost certainly a highly sophisticated news consumer, but even
the most dogged of DC politicos need a news aggregator to help them out. We're big fans of Upward News here at American Moment. Ari David has actually been a previous guest on this show. We highly recommend you check out that episode. But Upward.news is a way that our team keeps in touch with all of the crazy news stories going on around the world. Your Twitter feed is not necessarily 100% reliable to get a proper cross-section of everything going on that matters. Upward News is a fantastic young media startup that is really putting together fantastic newsletters and social media content that helps people digest the news, especially if you're tired of being on the phone with your parents and explaining news stories to them multiple times a week because you're the politico in the family. I highly recommend encouraging them to follow Upward.news. They do a free 5-minute daily email that you can sign up for at readupward.com, or even better, www.ihatefakenews.com. It's time for a palate cleanse from politicos, punch bowls, and pucks. Try Upward News today. We highly recommend it. Ari's an incredibly smart patriot, and they're a new player on the block focused on cutting through the noise and delivering smart analysis. Please check them out. Yeah. I get YouTube ads about it. I mean, it's very strange. I think there was news just a couple of days ago that Visa and MasterCard had reached some sort of settlement. Is that affecting how this issue trajectory is going? What's the story there?
I think it just amplifies the problem. Yeah. And I think that's the tip of the iceberg. Mm-hmm. I do feel a lot more of this populist movement, people saying, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that this was such a big problem. So as the public gets educated, I think it just shines a light on, my gosh, how much money are these banks making on this?
Well, and it's only going to get worse, right? Because the big trend I see with people my age and younger, they don't carry cash. So like I remember growing up, you'd go to a gas station and it'd say, any order any purchase under $5, it's cash only or something like that, or an additional fee. As that becomes less and less tenable because Gen Z isn't carrying cash, it's going to squeeze these small shops even more. And then the only thing that can survive is the big chains, Walmart and Target, et cetera, which is not, I would love to live in a world where when you walk down at downtown in, mid-sized American city, that you actually see local places and it's not the same 20 brands on every single street. So I appreciate you for thinking in a more creative way about this. Senator, we always like to ask our guests to finish out what's the thing they're paying attention to that no one else is right now. A lot of the leaders in this populist movement, they tend to be Cassandras for something that everyone will be talking about 3 years later. What's that issue for you? Something that you believe that no one else does, and how can people follow all of what you're thinking and working on?
Yeah. So they can go to marshall.senate.gov, marshall.senate.gov, and then our Twitter is at Roger Marshall M.D. I don't know if there's anything that I'm the only person thinking about. I mean, the budget, the $34 trillion debt is what almost keeps me up at night. I told you I sleep fine, but if I was going to be kept up by something, that would be it. We're going to spend $1 trillion on interest this year. I think I see national security a little bit different than a lot of people do up here in the Republican Party. I'm not a warmonger. Just did a trip to Indochina. We have 130,000 military personnel there. We have 100,000 in Europe. China is absolutely a threat to us, but we have an incredible military presence there. And the good news is Japan's working with us. We've got some really good allies over there now. Australia, India are working with us to put the pressure on them. I think that China has peaked economically, but we mentioned this earlier, we underestimate the cybersecurity attacks. We underestimate the propaganda. We underestimate the intellectual property theft. China makes 90% of the fake stuff that comes across our border, whether it's fake watches or fake Nike shoes, whatever it is. So I think that just putting the pressure on them and really to stop being dependent upon them financially. It's a $300 billion of trade between the two countries, between China and the U.S. So I get that. But we need to be looking for further newer partners. We wrote this new USMCA trade agreement under President Trump. Mexico has replaced China as our top export partner in many things, but especially agriculture. Of course, from Kansas, I'm focused on the agriculture part of this. It's not sexy, but it's certainly a national security issue, still wrapped around the axle over COVID-19, its origin from from China. I was the first person in Congress to come out and say that in January of 2020 and continue to have a body of evidence that shows that. Meanwhile, there's still more and more going on that America is still financing this gain of function research. I mean, my gosh, how much of a slap in the face do we need to say, look, this is more dangerous than nuclear warfare? So there's a couple things that are top of mind for me.
All important topics, and we really appreciate your leadership on all of them. Thank you for coming on our show.
I enjoyed it. I hope your listeners enjoyed it as well.
Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. I certainly enjoyed taping it. It was an absolutely fantastic episode with Senator Dr. Roger Marshall. As always, be sure to go to AmericanMoment.org. You can also become a member on YouTube. That's either a truther or a statesman. You get the episodes 24 hours early, as well as a bunch of other perks. You get to help support this show, make sure it continues to exist. Again, we've done like 150 episodes, and we're not stopping anytime soon. But we really appreciate the support and membership of that more tight-knit community, and you get access to the special bonus material as well. Be sure to go to AmericanMoment.org. You can donate, you can sign up for all of our programs and keep up to date with what we're doing. There's as Kim Guilfoyle says, the best is yet to come. We're really going to have a very exciting year here. Be sure to reach out to us, get involved, go to AmericanMoment.org/join, rate and review this podcast, and we will see you guys next week. Moment of Truth is an American Moment podcast taped at the Conservative Partnership Campus Studios and is produced by Jake Mercier, Jared Cummings, Tiffany Kutris, and Matthew Pearson. Our intro song is A Minor Struggle by Ryan Serenich, and our website is AmericanMoment.org.